Good morning. We're in the historic town of Lavenham today. Lavenham is in the lovely county of Suffolk, to the north of London. We're staying at the Swan Hotel in the town, and I've made a separate video all about the Swan. In this video, we're going for a walk around the centre of Lavenham to look at some of the historic buildings. We'll start our walk at the Swan Hotel and walk up the High Street. While we're walking, I'll tell you a little about the history of Lavenham and why there are more than 300 listed buildings here. One of the first things that you notice about Lavenham is a number of half-timbered medieval houses. I'll stop here and cross the road to take a photo of the house in front of us on our left. This is the famous Crooked House. This is part of a much larger building constructed at the end of the 1300s and is said to be the inspiration for the famous nursery rhyme, "There was a crooked man." According to Country Life magazine, this is one of the world's most photographed homes. You'll see evidence of this if you do a search on Instagram. We'll walk up Market Lane now, which leads to the marketplace. In the 14th, 15th and 16th centuries, Lavenham was one of the richest towns in England. Its wealth was built on the wool trade and the popular Lavenham blue cloth. Despite its population being no more than 2,000 people, Lavenham paid more tax than the great cities of Lincoln and York. There's a blue plaque here. I presume Mr. Darcy was a much-loved family pet. Getting back to the story, the wealthy wool merchants built grand hall houses and lavish guild halls to reflect their wealth, and it's some of these that we can still see today. Here we are now at the marketplace. It's quite large. The large building that we can see on the right is the Guildhall, one of the buildings constructed by the wealthy wool merchants. Today it's a museum, owned by the National Trust. Inside, we can see various displays and original features. The significance of the wool trade is highlighted. There's also a large section on Lavenham during World War II. There were several airfields in the area, many of which were used by the US Air Force. The Guildhall also included the town's lockup and the town's mortuary. In the 17th century, the Guildhall was used as Lavenham's workhouse, where the poor people made cloth of various types for sale to earn their keep. The weekly menu doesn't look very inspiring, does it? Today there's no workhouse. Instead, there's a very nice tea room and garden, with a much more interesting menu. We'll continue our walk past the Market Cross and on to Barn Street. Here we'll find another museum, housed in the building on our left, which is a little hall. This is one of the oldest timber-framed buildings in Lavenham. It dates from the 1390s, about the same time as the Crooked House. The house was restored in the 1920s and 30s by the Geyer Anderson twin brothers, who filled it with an eclectic mix of antiques, pictures, books, china and decorative art, much of which can still be seen in the museum today. We'll continue our walk down Barn Street, past several more medieval houses, including this one on our left. This is the old Victorian grammar school, whose former pupils include the famous landscape painter John Constable. At the bottom of the hill, we arrive at Water Street. The street takes its name from the stream, which flows down the entire length of the street. It's a mix of medieval cottages, larger houses and more modern buildings. As we walk down the street, we can see that some of the houses have first floors that stick out over the pavement. This is called jettying and has the advantage of increasing the available space in the building without obstructing the street. This was a very popular design technique in medieval houses until the Great Fire of London in 1666. We'll turn around now and walk back up Water Street. After the Great Fire of London, which lasted for 5 days, the authorities recognised that the jetty design increased the likelihood of the spread of fire, with flames jumping from one house to another across the narrow streets in London. The Rebuilding of London Act of 1667 brought in new regulations, such as banning jetties, imposing a maximum number of stories, and decreeing that buildings should be constructed of brick or stone. So that was the end of building half-timbered houses. We're coming up now to the most famous house in Water Street. The large house on our left is the De Vere House, owned by the De Vere family for 400 years. Several of the De Veres held the title of the Earl of Oxford. John De Vere, the 13th Earl, commanded the archers and vanguard at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. He played a decisive role in the Tudor victory, which effectively ended the Wars of the Roses. The De Vere house here was extended in the period immediately following the Battle of Bosworth. It was rebuilt again in 1929, but many of the original features remain. But that's not the only reason why this house is famous. You might recognise it. The De Vere house here was featured as Harry Potter's birthplace in the film Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 1. It's claimed that this doorway is the second most photographed doorway in Britain, after number 10 Downing Street. We'll continue on up Water Street. The question that we haven't answered yet is, why are there so many half-timbered medieval houses surviving in Lavenham? During the reign of Henry VIII in the 15th century, trade sanctions led to a loss of the country's export markets. Lighter and cheaper cloths became more popular, and the woolen cloth trade in Lavenham fell into decline. 400 years of cloth making came to an end, and Lavenham's wealth declined dramatically. Many of the former merchants' houses were divided up to provide small homes for large families. The Guildhall building was used as a workhouse, as we've seen. But it was this poverty and neglect that preserved the Lavenham we can see today. Few people could afford smart new Georgian and Victorian facades, and so the outdated medieval buildings remain. The streets that we've walked around today are still very much on the same scale as they would have been in the 15th century. Lavenham today is Britain's best preserved medieval town. Or is it a village? I'm not sure. There are many more interesting buildings to see in Lavenham, but there's only one more for us to see today. We need to walk up Church Street to see it. As you might have guessed, we're going to see the church. This is the church of St Peter and St Paul, and it's one of the finest parish churches in England. The main benefactors of the church that we can see today were the family of Thomas Spring, a very rich wool merchant, and John De Vere, the 13th Earl of Oxford, who we heard about earlier. His contribution to the construction of this magnificent church was as a thanksgiving for the Tudor victory at the Battle of Bosworth, which ended the Wars of the Roses in 1485. Presumably, he was in the favour of King Henry VII and did very well financially when the Tudors came to power. St Peter and St Paul's Church is a Grade 1 listed parish church, and what we can see today was built on parts of the existing church between 1485 and 1525. The tower is 141 feet high. It's one of the most important wool churches in England. A wool church was financed primarily by donations from rich merchants and farmers who benefited from the medieval wool trade. We'll have a very quick look inside. And so we'll leave the church, and that brings us to the end of our walk around historic Lavenham. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please give us a like or make a comment, and consider subscribing to our channel to see more videos from the Country Traveller. Thanks for watching.